So I explained to you that Yagya, Dana and Tapaha. Krishna says, Yagya, Dana, Tapa, Karma. Na karyam tyajam eva tat. Yagya, Dana, Tapa, Karma, Pavanani, Manishina. That the acts of Yagya, acts of Dana, and acts of Tapaha are activities that purify even the great souls. For I explained to you that all of us, even great souls, have the seed within them to expand and have the desire to enjoy, the desire to control and possess, and the desire to be better than other people. So the medicine for these three diseases, to enjoy, control and possess, and to be better than other people, the medicine is Yagya, Dana and Tapaha. So Tapaha, as I explained last time, helps you to control that desire to enjoy. Dana gives you control over that aspect of our mind which wants to keep controlling and possessing. And today we speak about Yagya. Yagya is that means by which we learn to extinguish, attenuate, and minimize that sense of self. This is diminished by the acts of Yagya. So Yagya begins in the Bhagavad Gita by Krishna explaining in the 4th chapter that in fact, in the 3rd chapter, Krishna explains that God in the beginning of creation created not just human beings, but he also created devatas. And he then blessed both of them. He blessed both of them by saying that I have also created sacrifice. And by this sacrifice, all human beings will be able to get what they require within this world. In chapter 3, text 10, Krishna says, Saha Yagna Praja Shishtva Purovacha Prajapati Anena Pravishwadivam Esha Vostva Ishtakamaduk. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices, and blessed them by saying, Be thou happy by this sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you all desirable things. Having said that, he then explains that the devatas will be pleased by your sacrifice, and thus you nourish the devatas with your sacrifice. The devatas nourish you by giving you what you need, and they will rain general prosperity for all. Devan bhavayate nena te deva bhavayantu vaha paraspara bhavayantaha shreya param avapsyataha. So Krishna explains that Ishtan Bhogan Hivo Deva Dasyante Yagna Bhavitaha Tair Dattan Apradebhyo Yo Bhunte Stena Evasaha. So the Devatas are in charge of the worldly things that we require, and they provide all necessities to man. And if we try to enjoy worldly things, without offering them to the Devtas in sacrifice, such a person, Krishna says, is certainly a thief. The idea that we can unlimitedly enjoy, control, possess, be better than other people is a disease. It's a disease of the mind. And therefore, in order that we should restrict that disease, limit that disease, that we should acknowledge that I, me, and myself are not the be-all and end-all of all existence. To control the ego, to attenuate the ego, to transcend the ego, to extinguish the ego, to annihilate the ego, God created sacrifice. If any of you have performed Yagya, or you have performed or attended any fire sacrifice or havan, you will see that in the mantras, there's always a line which says, Idam agnaya, idam na mama. This is for me, for you, Agni, this is not for me. Idam indraya, idam na mama. This is for you, Indra, this is not meant for me. So the idea is that the worship of the Devtas, or the system of worship of the Devtas, which is known as Karma Kanda, is the introduction to transcending yourself. How is it an introduction to transcending yourself? Because in the performance of Yagya, you acknowledge that there is something or somebody who is superior to you. And at least from the perspective of seeking something for yourself within this world, you will perform a sacrifice which will limit, weaken, attenuate, transcend your sense of self, or your ahankar for that period of time. Therefore, Krishna has recommended this Vedic system of Yagya. And this Vedic system of Yagya is to protect you from unlimitedly trying to expand your ego, trying to unlimitedly expand your sense of self and your sense of enjoyment and control and possession, so that you can offer things to a higher power, to a higher deity, under the temptation of getting the things of this world. And by doing so, you become a little humbler. So Krishna says, Yagna shishta sino santo muchyante sarva kilbishai bhunjate tetva agham papa ye pachantya atma karanat. Those who offer sacrifice to God and then eat remnants of sacrifice, which we know as prasad, such people are protected from sin. Whereas those people who are very desirous of enjoyment and heedlessly plunge into eating or enjoying the senses, such people engage only in sin. So Yagya of the Karma Kanda system is an integral part of human activities created along with the Vedas, so that we can diminish our ahankar and we can begin to acknowledge there is a higher power, and thereby we can limit, restrict, weaken, transcend our sense of self. Krishna goes one step further in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna begins to explain that it is not just fire sacrifice which is important, it is also important to perform your work as sacrifice. This is introduced in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And after beginning this in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out that actually by performing your work as sacrifice, you can also diminish your sense of self. So there are people who are unwilling to give up that sense of self. So the first level is you're tempted to give up that sense of self by performing some yagya, some offering to a higher power. So you have all these people who perform various kinds of vrats, all kinds of vrats, fasting, sacrifices, yagyas, havans, with the idea, oh God, give me this, oh God, give me that. And the idea of doing all that is simply so that they can acknowledge a higher power and they can restrict, weaken, transcend, at least for a short time, their sense of self. But Krishna points out, right, that in fact, the best sacrifice, which he has pointed out in chapter 2, chapter 3, right up till the time he comes into chapter 4, the best sacrifice we can perform is if we can perform a sacrifice in the form of their work. So the work that we do, we perform that sacrifice. The work that we do, we perform it with the idea that we will get a salary. We do it with the idea that we will get the worldly things that we desire, that we feel that we will be happy at the level of the mind, level of the body. We want money and things to enjoy in the world. At the level of the mind, we want to enjoy what we're doing. At the level of the intellect, we want to learn while we are working. And at the level of the ego, we want to show that we are better than other people. But one who gives up all these fruits, he acts in a act of sacrifice. Such a person becomes closer to God. There is only one thing that comes between you and God, and that is the sense of self. If you can annihilate the sense of self, if you can transcend the sense of self, if you can keep that sense of self in abeyance, if you can diminish that sense of self, if you can even control that sense of self, you will be closer to God. And Yagya is the way to do it. And therefore, in chapter 4, Krishna explains that there are many forms of sacrifice. All of them are designed for diminishing the sense of self. So Krishna says, some yogis, they perfectly worship the devtas. Other yogis, they perform the same yagya or sacrifice in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. There are others who perform yagya to control their mind by sacrificing the objects of the senses. When you give up things that, okay, from now on, I will no longer eat this. From now on, I will no longer do this act of favor. I'll give up my favorite fruit. I will give up my favorite food. These are all acts of sacrifice. So indeed, there are others who perform various acts of sacrifice. These include acts of pranayam. Various types of pranayam are there. Others engage in the eightfold system of yoga, which is Ashtanga Yoga. And thus, all these performers who perform yagya, the best yagya, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, Yagna nam japo yagnosmi. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, of all forms of sacrifice, I am that chanting of the holy name. So in text 30 of chapter 4, Krishna points out, Sarve api ete yagna vido yagna shapita kalmashah yagna shishtamrita bhujo yanti brahma sanatanam. All these people who perform sacrifice become cleansed of sinful action. And having tasted the nectar of the results of such sacrifice, they go to the supreme eternal abode. So this is very important. Sacrifice is the means by which we transcend our sense of self. Sacrifice is the means by which we become close to God and enter into his supreme abode. In fact, in text 31, Krishna points out of 4th chapter, Nayam lokosti ayagnasya kuto anya kuru sattama. O best of the Kurus, without sacrifice, without yagya, you cannot live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? So indeed, what is happening is that yagya or sacrifice is the means by which we diminish our sense of self. And by diminishing this sense of self, we automatically become transparent to the divine. We allow the divine to act through us, because as long as the divine is restricted in its flow by the belief, I am this prakriti, I am this sense of self, I am this intelligence, I am this mind, I am this body, so long you will be restricted in multiple ways and will encounter tremendous suffering. To reduce suffering, to function wonderfully within the world according to what God has planned for you, you need to perform sacrifice. Through the performance of sacrifice, you will get, number one, whatever you need within this world, your necessities will be all provided for. This is the result of performance of sacrifice or yagya. Number two, you will be protected from sin, because one who performs yagya is protected from sin, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Sin comes from the ego, and by performing yagya, you diminish the ego. Therefore, you diminish sin. Further, you become free from karma. Krishna points out, Yagnarthart karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sanga samachara. That all acts which you perform as a sacrifice to please God, all these acts will indeed make you free from karma. So we are all trapped in this cycle of karma, in this cycle of birth and death. We are trapped into repeated cycles of janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, dukkha, doshanu, darshanam. Birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, unhappiness. We are guaranteed to be trapped in this. But when we start acting for God in a spirit of sacrifice, when we diminish the sense of self through the performance of yagya, then we become free from karma. We get the necessities of life. We become free from sin. And indeed, Krishna says, we then attain supreme union with God. So, therefore, Krishna points out that yagya is very important. But Krishna also points out that there are people who are ignorant of scripture. There are people who have no idea what sacrifice is meant for. They don't understand that yagya is meant indeed for what? That yagya is meant to reduce your sense of self, your ahankar, your ego, to make you humble. And without any knowledge of scripture, these people attempt to perform sacrifice for various reasons. And thus the gunas trap them into performing various forms of sacrifice. What are the forms of sacrifice that are there? Krishna explains in chapter 17, text 13. Vidhi hinam ashrishtanam mantrahinam dakshinam, shraddha virahitam yagnam tamasam parichakshate. So vidhihinam, when you are performing scriptures which are completely without any direction from the Shastra, this is called vidhihinam. Ashrishtanam, at the performance of yagya or sacrifice, it is necessary to distribute prasad to people who attend that sacrifice. So to give them the blessed food, which is known as prasadam, is an integral part of yagya. So when you do it without scriptural direction, when you do it without the distribution of prasad, when you do it mantrahinam, without the chanting of Vedic mantras, adakshinam, without giving any offering to the priests who live by performing yagya for other people, they must be compensated. So without scriptural direction, without distributing prasad, without chanting Vedic hymns, without offering compensation or remuneration to the priests, without any faith, shraddha virahitam, that is known as tamasic yagya. So this is known as tamasic yagya. Krishna also explains in chapter 17, text 12, Abhisandhaya tu phalam, damba artham api chaivayat, ijjate bharata shreshta, tam yagnam vidhi rajasam. That sacrifice which is performed for some material objective or performed ostentatiously out of pride to show how big I am, how wonderful is this yagya I am doing, how great is the sacrifice I am performing. All people in the area, please come and see how great is the Ganesha that I have created or paid for this community. Everybody see how great it is. All that is only done for the sake of pride and ostentation. These things, sacrifices performed. Oh God, you must give me this. That is why I am performing this yagya. I am performing this sacrifice, this yagya, for the sake of getting this in return. So all that is said to be yagya, which is in the form of rajoguna, in the form of passion. But even those who are ignorant, even those who are not aware what sacrifice is for, they can perform it in sattva-gun. How do they do that? Afala kankshe bir yagna vidhi drishtah ya ijjate yashtavyam evati manah samadhaya sa satvikah. So when you perform yagya according to a sense of duty, according to scriptural rules, with the distribution of prasad, with the chanting of hymns, with the payment of the priest, with no expectation of reward, then such a sacrifice is said to be in the nature of goodness, or it is known as sattvic yagya. What Krishna wants from his devotees, or what Krishna wants, is something completely different. Not just yagya or fire sacrifice. Krishna wants you to engage in remembering him and forgetting yourself. This is the mantra I would like you to remember. Remember God, forget yourself. And by remembering God and forgetting self, that is the supreme yagya. And so that you may remember God and forget self, please perform your work as an act of sacrifice to please God. And I've explained this to you, but I'm repeating it again so that you may have a practical idea on how to perform yagya. And in practice, what you must do is, before you perform any task, any work, any email, before you attend any meeting, before you meet any client, before you engage in your work, you offer a flower at the feet of the Lord, saying, Hey Bhagwan, Om Tat Sat, this is an offering, this act I am engaging in, this work I am doing is a flower offered at your feet. So the email you send is a flower at his feet. The work that you're doing is a flower at his feet. The meeting you're attending is a flower at your feet. The client meeting is a flower offered at the Lord's feet. And at the end of the day, pick up all those flowers that you have offered at Krishna's feet, make them into a garland, and put that garland around the neck of Krishna in your mind with great devotion. And the heavier that garland, the lighter will be your heart. The lighter that garland, the heavier will be your heart. That is the law. So whatever you do, offer it as a flower at his feet. At the end of the day, go through the events of the day, picking up all the flowers you've offered to the Lord. Make them into a garland and offer them round his neck. And you will find that the heavier that garland will be, the lighter will be your heart. The wider will be the smile on Krishna's face. The greater will be the blessings you receive. And the more you remember God, the more effectively you will forget the self. And Krishna wants you to do this not just for your work. He wants you to do this for everything that you are doing. Yat karoshi, yad ashnasi, yat juhosi dadasi, yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushvam adarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, everything, Krishna says, do it for me. Because when you offer everything to Krishna, what happens? Shubha ashubha falayarevam moksha se karma bandhanai sannyasa yoga yuktena vimukto mami vishyasi. So all the actions that you're doing when you offer them as sacrifice to God, what happens? You attain freedom from Prakriti. You get freedom from your mind. You get freedom from this material universe. You attain moksha. You attain Jivan Mukti in this life and Videha Mukti when you leave this life. And when you do that, you go back to God. Vimukto mam evasyasi. You go back to God. So Krishna says that always think of me. Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskaru. Mam evasyasi yuktavam atmanam mat parayana. Always think of me, become my devotee, offer homage unto me. Be completely absorbed in thoughts of me and you will come to me without fail. So when your whole life becomes a yagya, when every act you perform is an act of sacrifice to please God, then you are leading the life the way Krishna wants you to lead your life. Your whole life has to become a yagya. So through this performance of yagya, you transcend ahankar. Through this performance of yagya, you transcend suffering. Through this performance of yagya, you attain whatever your requirements are within this world. Through this performance of yagya, you become free from all sin. Through this performance of yagya, you begin to realize that all beings, all of us, we are within God, we are part of Him and we are His. Through this performance of yagya, you begin to see God in all things and all things in God. And thus, God is never lost to you, nor are you ever lost to Him. So therefore, it's so important to perform yagya. We must set a target of performing every action in our life as yagya. and lead a life which is a life of Yagya. And by doing this, we will transcend all suffering and we will gain a reunion with God. So, Yagya is necessary for everybody because Yagya protects you from the performance of sin. Yagya is necessary for everybody because if you do not perform Yagya, then even the requirements of everyday life are restricted and limited. If we engage in the performance of Yagya, we also extinguish, weaken the sense of self, and by remembering God and forgetting self through Yagya, we attain the platform of Brahma Bhut and we attain the platform of Parabhakti. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatmana Sochati na Kankshati Samah Sarveshu Bhuteshu Madbhaktin Labate Param. And on that platform of Brahma Bhut, Krishna says, Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyaschashmi tatvatah tato mam tattato gnatva vishate tadanantaram. That it is only through devotion you shall know me as I am, and through devotion you can enter into my being from where there is no return. So that Parabhakti is given to you when you attain Jivan Mukti or Brahman. And this Brahman state is available to you when you perform all actions as Yagya. So I'll pause here. If anyone has any questions, you please feel free to ask.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, sir. So one of the questions that we have is, what is the right way? You can tell us what is the right way to perform yagya, and how often should one perform it?
I just explained that the right way to perform Yagya is to offer everything to God. Om Tat Sat, which is what Bhagavad Gita says, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Om Tat Sat. Everything that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer, all that you give away, all the charities you perform, the austerities you perform, everything do it as an offering to Krishna. I gave you a practical example of how to do it by offering a flower at God's feet every time you do something. Then to pick up all those flowers, make it into a garland at the end of the day and put it around Krishna's neck. And you will get daily practical affirmation of what you're doing. Because the heavier that garland will be, the lighter will be your heart. And the lighter that garland is, the heavier will be your heart. So the more actions you perform for self, your heart will be heavy. The more actions you perform for God, the lighter your heart will be. I also explained to you the importance of chanting God's name. That when you are not working, instead of being idle, instead of entertaining yourself with various other electronic devices, engage in chanting God's name. And by chanting God's name, you will extinguish that sense of self. By remembering God, you will forget the sense of self. Is that clear?
Yes, yes. The next question is, I'll read out the question slowly.
And how much sacrifice you should perform, that also explained. Everything should be sacrificed. Your whole life should be a sacrifice.
Right, of course. So I'll read out the question. Even the karma process of performing yagya for the ancestors, like we do in a lot of during the Pitru Paksh or this Shraddh period, should be performed for the Lord. Is this understanding correct?
To please God, you should perform all the necessary yagyas that are required in everyday life. Right? So therefore, God has created many systems for diminishing sense of self. And among them is Pitru Paksh. so that we remember with gratitude the people who have passed on, and by demonstrating this gratitude and remembrance of them at least once a year, we begin the process of transcending our ego and self. And in order to please God, we perform all these sacrifices. And divinity is situated in the hearts of all, even the departed ancestors. And therefore, we learn to see God in all things.
Right, of course. Thank you. Dr. Shantanu, you spoke about sins and the fact that performing yagya can help you. So, if can performing yags regularly can better your karma and can purge one from their old sins?
We don't want to better karma, we want to get rid of karma.
Rid of karma.
Shubha ashubha phalayarevam moksha se karma bandhane. We don't want good karma, we don't want bad karma. We only want to do things with the blessings of God and become close to Him. So yes, by the performance of Yagya, you attain divine knowledge that everything lies within God, it is within Him and it is His. You also diminish your sense of self and eventually extinguish it, if not transcend it. So that gets rid of all your karmas. Yatha idhansi samido agnir bhasmasat kurute arjuna, gnyan agni dagda karmani bhasmasat kurute tatha. Just like the fire makes firewood into ashes, so also the blazing fire of spiritual realization that all things lie in God, they are in Him and they are His. By diminishing this or extinguishing the sense of self, all your sins are extinguished and destroyed.
Right. Dr. Shantanu, I want to ask you, is that Yagya, when performed for, say, a non-materialistic gain, so to put it, someone's
Pardon,
health is suffering.
say it again.
Okay, I'll say it again. Yagya perform for a non-materialistic gain. So I'll just give you an example. Some months back, a friend of mine was very sick. She was very sick with COVID. So her family performed this yagya, and they did a lot of dan and everything. So the whole concept was that she gets better, and she did get better, thankfully, and she kind of recovered. So yagya done with such a motive, which is not necessarily materialistic but more to do with health, safety, and wellness. Is it the right way to do it with a motive in mind?
There is no wrong way to worship God. So whether you worship Him with desire, without desire, with full of desire, whether you worship God with the desire for moksha, it doesn't matter. Akamo sarvakamo va moksha kama udaradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham param. So in all circumstances, with desire, without desire, full of desire, to become free of desire, please worship God. So everybody is not at the same level of knowledge, realization, or spiritual and advancement. So wherever you are, just worship God. Everything else will get sorted out along the way.
Right, of course, and I think we'll take one last question. Dr. Shantanu, should all family members and children take part in the yagya and the sacrifice process?
When a yagya is performed in the home, that yagya necessarily requires participation of all family members. But don't force anyone to do anything. That has to come from the Lord within their heart. Anything performed under compulsion, anything performed by force, all these things are not really spiritual. So therefore, everybody should participate in yagya, there's no doubt. But why don't you understand that everything in the world happens by God's consent? So if God wills, they will participate. If God doesn't will, they will not participate. So you leave it to God to control. You don't try to control people, you let God control them. And as long as you are controlled by God, you will serve as a model for other people to follow and imitate.
Great. Thank you. These were the questions we had this week, Dr. Nagarkatti, and we do have some time. So if you want to add on to the session or let us
So
know.
there is a verse in Bhagavad which says, Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti radhok saje. Ahai tuki apratihata yayatma suprasiddha. The topmost religion is that religion which teaches you to love God. It doesn't say that Hinduism is the best or Vaishnavism is the best or this is the best or that is the best. Whatever religion teaches you to love God, that is the best. And in order to fully satisfy the needs of the soul, the characteristics of this religion are that it is unmotivated and uninterrupted. So unmotivated means you don't ask God for anything. न धनम न जन्म न सुंदरिम कविताम व जगदीश कामये मम जन्मनि जन्मनीश्वरे भवतात भक्ति रहित. Oh Lord, I don't want wealth, I don't want beautiful members of the opposite sex, I don't want disciples or followers, I don't even want to be free from the cycle of birth and death. You can bring me back into this world again and again and again to serve you. Ashlishava padratam pinastumam adarshanam marmatam karotuva yatha tatha vizatulampato mat prananathastu sayevanapara. That, oh Lord, even if you treat me roughly in your embrace, even if you kick me, even if you neglect me, even if you make me broken-hearted by never appearing in front of me, even then you shall be my worshipful Lord unconditionally. So this is called Ahaituki Bhakti. And this is the supreme form of worship. Similarly, it is not 5 times a day that we pray to God or 10 times a day we pray to God. We never stop praying to God. Our whole life becomes a prayer to God. Our whole life is a meditation upon God. Everything we do is a prayer to God. That is called uninterrupted. So when we can worship God unmotivatedly, uninterruptedly, you will know a supreme peace that transcends all understanding. Doesn't matter what you're going through right now, whether it's a financial crisis, a job crisis, a relationship crisis, a health crisis. If you are absorbed in God so that you forget yourself through the performance of Yagya, you will be blissful in all circumstances. If you can remember that, and if you can make your life a Yagya, then you will understand what I am saying.
Right. Dr. Shantanu, we've just got another question. Maybe you would want to take it up. Let me know. I'll read out the question. Does Gyan Yagya, Karma Yagya, and Mantra Yagya go hand in hand? Do we have to balance them?
See, the important thing is whatever helps you to remember God and forget self, you should do. Most important is to remember God and forget self. And the most important way to do that is to perform your duties towards the world and towards everyone around you. You can be following Jnana Yagya to the extent that you are intellectual. You can follow Bhakti Yoga to the extent you are emotional. You can perform Karma Yoga to the extent you can occupy yourself in adding value to the world. You can engage in Dhyan Yoga to the extent that you can find the occasion for peaceful, silent meditation. You can perform mantra yoga, which is the constant chanting of the holy names, and which is in fact the yoga which is prescribed for this day and age. Whatever helps you to remember God and forget self, that is what you should follow. But your life should always be balanced. The job of a spiritual teacher is to teach you how to go mad, God mad, that is. And the second job of the teacher is to help you to hide it from the rest of the world. See, even in the Bible, Christ says, if you are not of this world, people will hate you. But if you are of this world, people will love you. You join someone in a cigarette or you go and join someone over a drink, they will love you. But if they find that you are not of this world, you are not smoking, you are not drinking, you are doing japa, then they will hate you. So for God's sake, and mainly for the continued, uninterrupted, peaceful practice of spiritual activities, conceal, hide your madness, your God madness from the rest of the world. Therefore, be an exemplar in society. Perform your duty to the extent, to the best extent you can. Anyway, you're offering it to God, so offer God the best from your work. Offer your relationships the very best, because you're offering those relationships to God. So in this way, by performing at the best level in a spirit of sacrifice in everything in the world, what will happen? Your God madness will be hidden from them, which will thereby give you freedom to practice spirituality in a more peaceful, uninterrupted manner. Unfortunately, because they don't know the meaning of Yagya, people use their spiritual activities to expand their ahankar. Oh, I am so spiritual. Oh, I gave this up. Oh, I gave that up. Oh, I gave that up. Then the person says, better I give you up. So don't tom-tom what you have given up. Don't tom-tom what spiritual activities you're engaged in. Conceal them, hide them. Just remember God and forget self.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shantanu. And that's the time for today we have.
So,
And
Hari
Hari
Om,
Om, Hare
Jai Shri
Krishna.
Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Thank you so